I'm Hilary Doyle, and this is Full Circle. Most organizations treat brand as a marketing driver. It's something that gets communicated through campaigns and messaging, but really it ends there. The strongest organizations, however, are using brand differently. So, our question today: what happens when companies use brand to make their enterprise decisions? This is an episode for CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and all the C suite leaders looking to make sharper growth decisions in a rapidly evolving business environment. I'm joined by two leaders sitting at the intersection of brand and business strategy. Livia Zufferli is a senior marketing executive and a partner in Deloitte's customer practice, and Maja is the global CMO at TD. That's the sixth largest bank in North America, serving over 28 million clients. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Livia, I'd like to start with a level set. In 2026, how should we be thinking about brand? Where does it start? Where does it end?
I think 2026 and just kind of modern day brand is more important than ever because you're seeing fragmentation of audiences and attention, regardless of industry that you're in. 20 years ago, when I was starting in the business or starting in my brand career, brand almost felt like a nice, creative thing to have. And now it fundamentally is the reason I think companies should exist in the minds of their clients or customers and consumers. It really is what will stand out in a crowded marketplace.
Maja, TD launched a new brand platform in February. Where did the conversation start for a rebrand, and what was the process for building support around it?
It's both outside in and inside out, as it always is, right? Banking is at an inflection point. Consumers' expectations have changed. Consumers want banking to be available at their fingertips on their phone, and they also want the human when they need it. We also see that in the banking, there is a sea of sameness, so to speak. TD also needed one global story. While we had some parts of the brand common across our footprint, we did not have a unified brand position and a unified brand expression across of all of our footprint. And so with the new CEO, we set on to think about the future, as you would, within a part of our global strategy. And obviously, the part of that was to look into our purpose and promise, and then the brand expression. So we redefined what the TD stands for, and then we really took it into the brand execution.
When you talk about purpose and promise and redefining that 170 years in, what does that look like, and where did you start?
Yeah, some of the pillars are the same. TD was always grounded in truly understanding the customers and doing right by the customers. So that has not changed. But because the world around us is changing, we said, what is our expression of the purpose and promise going forward? We want to reimagine what banking can be for clients, communities, and customers. And we want to make sure that we're remarkably human and refreshingly simple. And then we set out to say, what does that mean with our brand expression and how do we show up to the marketplace?
How are you operationalizing the more human brand across the organization right now?
So everything from strategy, how are we building our strategies? How are we building our business plans to deliver proof points? So when we think about delivering more human, we take a very comprehensive view of that. We start with the business strategy. How are we integrating more human proof points in our business strategies? Then we take it to the next
Give
level.
me an example.
For example, what is the roadmap for our product services and experiences that we're planning for this year? And how are we making sure that all of those products or services we're building are human and simple? So that is the overarching theme that we have for the lineup of experiences that we're building. Then the second is, how are our colleagues in the front lines and across the organization thinking about their day-to-day job to ensure that we're delivering a more human experience? So it's a little bit easier in the front lines, in part because that's kind of what the bank has always been about. So it's really building on that and making sure that we continue to do really well on the 80% of stuff that we do really well, and that we systematically work through the experiences that are more cumbersome and perhaps not as simple as we would like them to be. And then we really take it into inside of the organization. So we work with all of our teams. Imagine a risk team or a finance team. So we will work with them to really think through their ways of working and ask them, how What you're doing is delivering this brand promise. So both in the way you interact with other colleagues and the way you do the work, but we want to make sure that everybody in the organization, both in the front lines and inside the headquarters, understand their relationship of their work to the end customer.
Yeah, no, I think that's like one of the simplest things. Like anytime as a leader in marketing, you go into an organization, a new one, I think you can very simply say like, what's the role to each of your departments, or go to each of your individuals on the team and throughout the company and say, okay, what's your role in bringing the brand to life, and have that like it's a bit of a exercise that you can bring throughout the organization. So folks, sometimes I know in places I've done it, they're like, "Oh, do I have a role in bringing the brand to life?" It's like, well, of course you do. You work here, and you may or may not have a frontline facing kind of point of view, but we're all here to bring the brand to life because that's the asset we all mutually have, right? So even in a simple exercise like, what's your role in bringing it to life, and having those discussions with your teams, I think that's like a super easy way to start to operationalize. The other part is, onboarding. When you're bringing new talent into the organization, there's always a bit of the primer on this is what the company does and this is where we operate and, everything. But there has to be a primer on this is who we are as a brand. Like that, the language, the vernacular that's used like consistently, that has to be put into all of our sort of talent and onboarding things that we do to ensure that from day one that you have somebody joining your organization, they're starting on that journey of understanding what the brand is, because then ultimately they'll be able to start making decisions quicker once that kind of intuition around this is what our brand stands for and should I do X or Y, like these decisions start to get accelerated because that intuition is growing.
Let's talk about this decision piece. I mean, how are you seeing decisions being made differently in the wake of this brand relaunch?
Yeah, so the one thing we do have is like any change in the organization, you want your tentacles everywhere in the organization. It's a big team, right? So we have our brand ambassadors across all different parts of the organization: risk, compliance, legal team, marketing team, product teams, whose job is to promote our brand and whose job is to make sure that what we do is delivering on that brand outcome. So that is how they will help us demonstrate delivering more human in day-to-day decisions that we're making. We also, when we decide whether a product is ready for launch or when we proceed with anything to the customer, we have a set of standards that we want to meet in order to achieve the brand standard that we want to have for our customers.
What is that set of standards?
There are customer experience principles and standards that we want to use to deliver the experiences to the customers. I'll pick one simple, right? Like we have a new product and now we need to write the new legal text for that product, right? So how are we making sure that the consumers, when they read it, they know what it means and what implications of it may be for them?
Like even anything around product naming, as an example. We both worked in telco, and at some point, all of the names were a combination of letters and numbers for all the products we were putting out there, right? And as we tried to move to a more kind of friendlier brand, part of that also impacted how you started to name your products. So it totally changed the construct of how all of our products started to get named and rolled out. So even something small like that, it's not small because all of these pieces, like a puzzle, contribute to that consistent, unified brand experience. And it's like there's so many different levers. It's very difficult. Sometimes we go into organizations and they ask us to do a brand audit. Tell us everything where we need to be aware of if we're going to relaunch or change a name or anything. And it's fast, it's everywhere. Like the amount of work that goes into any type of refresh or change, it's immense. And that's why these things often take over a year, right? To do a proper large scale relaunch.
I don't know if you know this, but the two of you went to the same university.
I didn't know that before this.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Go Warriors.
Yes. So Livia majored in international trade and economics.
Yes.
And Maja, you focused on math, both at the University of Waterloo. I am curious how your background has shaped your approach to both brand and strategy.
Hey, I took economics, so what was I learning? The fundamentals of demand and driving demand. So I think that was like a really good,
Definitely.
parlay and through line into just generally understanding business and marketing. But it did make me comfortable, I think, going into eventually getting into the marketing sort of career in that space. I liked that I understood how to drive business, understanding how corporate strategy and these sorts of broader strategic plans impacted marketing or how that both had to come hand in hand.
And Maya, how is a math degree shaping your approach to marketing?
The field of marketing is so complex and really is art and science. You kind of come from one or the other sides, and
Mhm.
then you have to fulfill the other component of it and match the two. I love the logic and the process of the math. I love the problem solving. That's what always gave me like I really liked solving problems. And so when you think about it, like so much of what we do today in business world is solving problems. Like take a big problem, break it up into the pieces. So as a leader, it really helps you kind of in being able to do that. And from the marketing perspective, I studied like statistics and optimization, sort of big data field. So when I look at the data now that comes to me, it's much easier for me to process and really most importantly ask good questions, ask my team good questions. So when I get in front of the finance team, I feel really good about explaining the data so I understand it. And then through my work and first the co-op jobs and then other jobs, I realized I really enjoy being close to the client, customer in whatever business I was in. So I got first into the field more of like consumer research and building digital products and services, and then actually leading marketing teams, leading the frontline teams. So I always had this pull to be close to the customer. And so I think I found a spot where you can do both and magic happens.
You have always, Maya, had an expertise in bringing traditional brands magically into modern spaces. Famously, you brought banking to Twitch. And I am curious how you strike the balance when it comes to brand between legacy and modern relevance. Is there kind of a magic ratio that we should be looking to strike?
I don't think there's a magical number. I think the real opportunity again goes back to truly understanding your customer. Like and not just seeing your customer when they're using their credit card, seeing your customer in the totality of their life. What are the journeys they go through? What are their worries? What are the tensions that they have to deal with? What brings them joy? And kind of how can you put the things together that way? And that's where you unearth opportunities. We get into these big jobs and we think most of our job is to make decisions. And so we're so busy making decisions that it's very hard to dedicate the time to look out. So I work really hard to dedicate the time for myself to look out, to seek new ideas, to really be educated by different people completely outside of my regular sphere of life. And I think that gives a lot more opportunities and openness. And I would say partnerships. All brands have many, many different partners. May that be people like Google and Meta, to your party partners that you may have co-partnerships with, or any other agencies that you work with that see your brand from a different angle. And in a big organization, you just get cocooned into your
Yeah.
spot. You end up in your PowerPoints and your Excel sheets and you're meeting with the CFOs. And so I think you have to rely on that outside network to advise you and bring you an ideas how to be more relevant to your
hmm
customers.
And I think like that's the important thing to think about is like as a consumer, they're not evaluating bank brands versus each other. They're evaluating bank brands versus Amazon or other, like can you deliver something to me so seamlessly and easily and quickly? Like those are now the fundamental expectations of many consumers. And regardless of industry you're in, whether they're experiencing something from a tech company, they want all of their experiences to perhaps be at that level of convenience or what have you. And so consumers have the upper hand. There is a lot of expectation. And I think for us to be able to deliver on that, you have to, as Maya said, be really like mindful of what's outside and generationally. A lot of client, and I'm sure and you're seeing this in the bank, like the different cohorts of generations want to think differently about brands or transact in a different way, and all of that is there's a lot to take in, but if you're not listening continuously to these trends and to the needs of your consumers and looking at other behaviors outside of even your own country, right? Other brands and companies globally. I think traditionally like Canadian firms don't want to look just at Canadian counterparts' best practices. We have to be looking globally because that's what our consumers are exposed to, these global brands.
Where do you see the most inspired global brands?
We see a lot of the innovation, obviously, outside of the whole Silicon Valley and everything we saw in the tech world, but there's a lot of interesting work happening. If I'm looking at my retail space in Europe, we see a lot of sort of analogs and kind of interesting things. Asia, with respect to how consumers are transacting over different channels that we don't here in Canada, right? Like it's a fundamentally different model, and I do think that increasingly that's where we're looking versus maybe just looking south of the border, which is what we would have done 10 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one thing I learned from my previous life when I worked for a Norwegian telco. We operated in many different countries in the world, and most innovation came from the poorest countries because
hmm
it's the scarcity that creates a space for innovation. And so you ask the questions that you would never ask in rich world. Like you never, you don't think how would you make a business with $5 revenue per month. You never think about how can I build a network that costs me 1/10 of the network that it costs me today. And so we do find that there's lots of innovation in banking and financial services that's actually coming from the countries that were potentially traditionally unbanked. So new ways of approaching the customer and creating partnerships or solutions that go way across the industries that we don't do today because of the ecosystem that we live in. So there's lots of innovation from really across the world that we can look to get inspired.
That's a great example. If you look at Central America, right? Like convenience
Mhm.
stores serve almost a dual purpose as a bank for the
Exactly.
underbanked or unaddressed segments, right? So it
Mhm.
is pretty fascinating.
That's a very important point. We have spent so much time as a result of the rise of AI and agentic everything and influencer culture talking about disintermediation and disruption. But ultimately, what are the key characteristics that really do drive consumer behaviors when it comes to brand?
I think ultimately, if I'm just going to boil it down, I think it's relevancy and connection. So as a consumer, maybe I'm looking at value versus ease, but ultimately, uh, the strongest brands understand who they are trying to serve, right? And trying to find through the consumer research and the needs assessment and everything, what it, how can I be most relevant to this consumer segment? Or in case of banking, there's multiple consumer segments, but how can I be most relevant, whether it be from a tangible or intangible standpoint? And the brands that I think are the most successful figure out how to drive that connection and that relationship, right? And I'm not saying it's just all through communications or what have you, but understanding the combination of attributes like convenience or what type of product they're putting out there, what channels they're activating for their clients and consumers. Ultimately, understanding that trust is so key, but it's just the nature of like, as a consumer, is this brand for me? Do I see this brand as a part of my life? And like that's a bit of the magic part you have to try to make work. You can do obviously all the work through data and targeting, but if your, let's say, message or your ethos or your values as a brand don't connect with that consumer, then the relevance to them is minimal, or they might not feel like supporting you beyond a transactional level.
Well, and to build on that, it is very much relevant. And we do see that you mentioned trust. It's such an important aspect of like long-term relationship with the brand. Is whether you trust this brand, and we see by and large that the trust in the institutions is going down.
Mhm.
So for a brand like TD, trust is of the utmost importance. That's really what we have with the consumers, right? So it's really important. And how is the trust built? It's like you do what you say you would, right? So it's really about making the clarity of the claims to the customers, then delivering upon those like over and over and over again.
Mm. And I think too, there's so many experiences there. Like if you think about trust takes a long time to earn and it can be lost,
Mhm.
in
That's
one
it.
in one
Mhm.
bad experience. Like in the case of huge multinational organization, if you think about like you have call centers that are dealing with customers, you have all of your in-branch employees. Like there are so many people that are your kind of ambassadors to the brand, and one negative experience with any of them could could be detrimental to a client relationship. And I would say, as the head of marketing or brand, you're always thinking about how do I make everybody in my organization take accountability and feel like they they are part of the brand, and they are an ambassador, they're a steward. They have to keep this brand safe. It's not just the role of the marketers, and that sort of communication and change management within an organization is not easy either, like especially with a huge organization, right? So how somebody wants to be
Absolutely.
treated when calling a call center, that's part of the brand to the client.
Brands are very much built inside and out,
Yeah.
which means what do your 100,000, we have 100,000 colleagues at TD. So what do they do every day? How they show up in front of consumers? That's how the brand is built. What I do in advertising could only, like, if that what I do in advertising has to match what they deliver in the front lines, what we deliver in digital channels. And so I think that importance of having the entire organization understand and feel the passion and responsibility and accountability to deliver what the brand is promising is a key to success for long-term success of brands.
We have questions from listeners. They want your advice on business situations they are currently facing off against. So we've pulled one for each of you. And Maya, I'll start with you into the hot seat. You have an opportunity to launch a product that is going to drive short term revenue, but it stretches what customers really expect from the brand. What do you do? How are you using brand to drive that decision?
I would argue that you should not launch the product. Because if it goes against your brand long term, it's like you need to build a brand for long term success. Everything that you do, whether it's short term or long term, impacts your brand. We all have a brand, whether we manage it or not. So, for launching something that's not grounded in the realities of where we want to take the brand, I would say that probably the long term math on that product would not work out.
Another question that came in from one of our listeners. They were expanding into a new market where the local preferences really differed from the core identity of the brand that they were representing. They'd like to know what you would look to standardize versus localize. How would you even frame the decision using
Mhm.
brand as a driver?
Well, I could say that I lived this scenario
Go
when
on.
helping a large U.S. retailer enter Canada, and I think sometimes we get the sort of messaging that, oh, Canadians and Americans are similar and what have you. But until you have to launch, in a different country, you start to see that there are quite a few differences, obviously, not just in demographic makeup and what have you, but just in shopping preferences and like so many factors. Even something as simple as Canadians wanted a flyer. They wanted, when they walked into a store, to see that flyer, and that was much more important to a Canadian than to our American counterparts. And so, really, I think like getting the data and being able to understand what's going to resonate in that local market, but also the life cycle of where the brand is different, right? So in the U.S., the brand is 50 years old. Launching in Canada, there might have been some awareness of the brand and maybe some kind of a smaller cohort of diehard, consumers that would have shopped it in the past in the US. But we had to really go back 50 years and say, we're at the beginning of this brand's journey in Canada. So we have to educate on certain things that the US doesn't have to educate their consumers on anymore. So it's not just ever going to be a lift and shift. You need the data and you need to understand the consumer in the competitive context to really give you the best shot of being successful.
Ultimately, that US retailer retreated from Canada. So, hindsight being what it is there anything you feel might have been achieved at the brand level to avoid that outcome?
I think ultimately we suffered from, a very challenging operational sort of set of issues. And so largely we let down our customers because of product not being essentially available and as expected. So the interesting thing is, before we launched, we weren't necessarily aware of all the operational challenges to come pre-launch. And so a lot of our communications and marketing, and we were out there shouting from the rooftops, like, this is going to be the best retail experience you're going to have, consumer X. Like, you won't have seen anything like this in Canada. And unfortunately, when doors opened, the operational realities meant that we weren't showing up our best. And we didn't know that. So in hindsight, would we have promised so much and screamed from the rooftop so much? But ultimately, what we had to do was then pivot to say, okay, we didn't show up for the consumer the way that we had promised, and then we had to become very authentic in our communications, saying, you know what, we didn't do what we promised, and so we're going to be working at getting better. And I think ultimately, as a brand, it needed more time. It was just the operational complexity was so great that we needed more time to get out of that sort of deficit that was created by a less than, stellar opening. So in time, I think we would have gotten there, but we ran out of time.
Such a powerful learning in that one, Livia. I think I translate that to our everyday. Like all of us are launching some new things, products, services, experiences all the time. And often there's so much desire to launch something and then, put all the marketing on top of it. And there's this concept of minimum viable product, which I think has done a disservice to many brands, because you launch some kind of a thing that's not quite there, you market it, you set the expectations, and then it does not deliver to the customer. It takes me back to that sort of a basic. I remember back from the business school, one of the marketing concepts that I find is still so true, and it's called 3V concept. So it's who is your valued customer, what is your value proposition to that customer, and then what is your value network to deliver on that proposition. 3Vs. Like it's as simple as it gets, but when you bring it back to what really matters, at the end of the day, it's all about that. Like, did you get what your customer wanted? And then what did you promise them? And did you deliver what you promised? So the three things have to fit together. The hardest one is the value network, because if you think for a bank of 100,000 people, like that's the network, right? So you need that whole ecosystem to work to deliver the promise. And so I think that's sort of a basic of that equation matters so much in both big and small launches. And Livia walked us through a really big one, but I think the learning is very applicable to what many brands do every day.
Livia Zufferli, Maja Neable, we have to leave it there. Thank you for having a different conversation with us about brand. I have really appreciated the honesty.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for Full Circle this week. Thanks to listeners who shared their questions with us. We love to hear from you. You can reach us anytime at circleback@deloitte.ca. We are back again in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, why not catch up on episodes you've missed? Sumak Chatterjee and John Ruffalo were here recently. We were discussing Canada's financial sovereignty and the future of money. You do not want to miss this conversation. If you're in the marketing headspace after today's pod, you can listen to our recent episode with Catherine Laporte and François Gaumond. She is the Chief Digital and Marketing Officer at Rona. He is Deloitte Canada's National Marketing Practice Leader. We spoke about the role of the CMO in 2026, and the takeaways are likely to shift the way that you think about your entire C-suite. Gosh, you don't want to miss any of these conversations, so please subscribe to Full Circle. Take that off your to-do list, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.